The wreckage burned like a dying star across the desert floor, metal twisted into prayers no one would answer. Among the smoke and screaming steel, a blue-skinned girl knelt in the sand, her body trembling with a fear older than war itself. When the human mechanic found her there, oil-stained hands reaching through the flames, she whispered the only words she knew in his language. "Please don't hurt me. I can't fight." But he didn't raise a weapon. He lifted her instead. And in that single act of mercy, he became the most dangerous man in 2 galaxies. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The desert didn't forgive, and it didn't forget. It simply waited, patient as bone, for everything to return to dust. Elias Carter had learned the truth over 7 years of fixing broken machines in a landscape that broke everything else. His workshop sat like a rusted prayer at the edge of nowhere, surrounded by sand that remembered when this place had been green. The sky above stretched violet and gold, twin suns setting in their eternal dance, and the air tasted like copper and regret. He was walking back from the supply depot when he saw the smoke, a black column rising like a question mark against the dying light. The crash site sprawled across 300 meters of scorched earth. Metal fragments jutted from sand like shattered ribs, still glowing with the heat of atmospheric entry. The ship had been small, a scout-class vessel by the look of it, torn apart by something that left claw marks in the hull. Elias approached slowly, his boots crunching over glass that had once been cockpit windows. The air shimmered with residual heat and the chemical stink of alien fuel burning itself out. He had seen crashes before. The war between Earth and the Kalon Empire had painted this desert with wreckage for 2 decades. But he had never seen one this fresh, this close, this alive with the sound of someone crying. She was curled against what remained of the starboard hull, her body folded in on itself like origami made from pain. Her skin was the blue of deep ocean water, marked with silver lines that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent terror. Her uniform hung in tatters, revealing wounds that bled a color Elias had no name for. When his shadow fell across her, she looked up with eyes too large for her face, eyes that held the universe and all its cruelty. Her lips moved, forming words in broken English, each syllable a surrender. "Please don't hurt me. I can't fight." Her voice was smoke and glass, barely louder than the wind. Elias had been trained by the Earth Defense Corps. He knew protocol. Kalon scouts were enemy combatants. They carried intelligence. They were valuable prisoners or necessary casualties, but never refugees, never victims, never children who begged in the language of their conquerors because they had no other words to give. He should have called it in. He should have walked away. He should have remembered that mercy was a luxury the desert had long since burned away. Instead, he knelt in the sand beside her, his oil-stained hands gentle as he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, lighter than the tools he carried every day, lighter than the guilt he would carry forever if he left her here to die. She flinched when he touched her, but she did not fight. She had told him the truth. She couldn't. And somewhere in the failing light, Elias Carter became something the war had tried very hard to kill. He became kind. The workshop smelled like oil and old coffee, a smell that had become home to Elias in the way that safety becomes ordinary. He laid the girl on the workbench he had cleared with one sweep of his arm, tools clattering to the concrete floor like metallic rain. She whimpered at the sound, her whole body going rigid, and Elias realized she was waiting for the blow that always followed noise in whatever hell she had come from. He moved slower after that, each gesture deliberate as a promise. The wounds were worse than he had thought. 3 deep gashes across her ribs, burn marks on her wrists that looked suspiciously like restraints, and a fracture in her left arm that had set wrong and healed badly, probably weeks ago. Elias had learned field medicine the way most mechanics did, through necessity and the kind of mistakes that left scars. He worked in silence, cleaning and binding, his hands steady even as his mind raced through the implications of what he was doing. Harboring an enemy combatant. Treason. Execution, if they caught him. But when he looked at her face, at the way her eyes tracked his every movement with the hypervigilance of prey, he could not find an enemy. only exhaustion that had worn grooves into someone far too young to carry it. She spoke once while he worked, her voice barely a thread. "They said humans eat us." Elias paused, the absurdity of it striking him like a physical blow. "No," he said quietly, "we don't." She studied him for a long moment, those two large eyes searching for the lie she had been taught to expect. When she found none, something in her face cracked, just slightly, the way ice cracks before the thaw. He offered her water, and she drank like she had forgotten water could be clean. He offered her bread, and she held it in both hands as if it were sacred. When he draped a blanket over her shoulders, she flinched again. Then slowly, carefully, pulled it tighter. The silver lines on her skin had stopped pulsing with panic. Now they glowed soft and steady, like a heartbeat finally remembered how to be calm. Elias pulled up a stool and sat at a distance that felt safe, his hands visible, his posture open. "My name is Elias," he said, pointing to himself. She watched his finger, then his face, then his hands again. She was learning him the way one learns a map of dangerous territory. After a long silence, she touched her own chest with trembling fingers, careful of her wounds. "Lyra," she whispered. The name sounded like water over stones, like something that belonged to a world gentler than this one. Elias nodded slowly. "Lyra," he repeated, and she closed her eyes as if hearing her own name spoken without venom was a kind of medicine no bandage could provide. Outside, the desert wind howled against the workshop walls, but inside, for the first time in what might have been forever, Lyra stopped shaking. Morning arrived in shades of amber and dust. Elias woke to find Lyra exactly where he had left her, curled on the workbench with the blanket pulled to her chin. Her eyes open and watching the door as if sleep were a luxury she could not afford. He had spent the night in the corner on a pile of canvas tops, giving her space, giving her the illusion of control in a situation where she had none. When he stood, she tensed, and he remembered again that every movement he made was a language she had learned to read for survival. He raised his hands slowly, palms out, the universal gesture of peace, and moved to the small kitchenette he had built into the back wall. Coffee first, then trust. He made breakfast with the same deliberate slowness he had used to clean her wounds, cracking eggs into a pan, toasting bread, pouring water into chipped mugs. The smell filled the workshop, rich and ordinary. And he saw her nostrils flare, her head tilting slightly, as if she were trying to remember something from before the fear. He plated the food and set it on a crate near the workbench, then retreated to his corner to eat his own portion. She watched him take the first bite, watched him swallow, watched him not die or transform into whatever monster her people had told her about. Only then did she reach for the plate, with hands that still trembled but no longer shook. They ate in silence, the kind that held weight and meaning. Afterward, Elias tried to explain with gestures what he needed to do. He pointed to the wreckage visible through the window, then to tools, then to the act of covering, hiding, erasing. She understood faster than he expected, her intelligence bright behind those ancient eyes. She nodded once, sharp and certain, and tried to stand. Her legs gave out immediately, the fracture and exhaustion conspiring against her will. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, and this time, she did not flinch. This time she let him hold her weight for the 3 seconds it took to lower her back to the bench. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an agreement, a treaty written in the language of hands that caught and did not harm. Elias spent the day dismantling the evidence of her arrival, dragging twisted metal into his salvage pile, scattering sand over burn marks, erasing her from the desert's memory. When he returned at dusk, covered in sweat and dust, he found her sitting upright, the blanket folded neatly beside her. She had braided a piece of wire into a small geometric pattern, something beautiful made from scraps. She held it out to him, her expression uncertain, and he understood this too. A gift, a thank you in the only language she had left. He took it carefully and smiled, and for the first time since the crash, Lyra smiled back. It was small and fragile and fierce, like the first flower that blooms in scorched earth. The patrol arrived on the 3rd day. their vehicles cutting across the horizon like blades through silk. Elias saw the dust plumes from his rooftop, where he had been reinforcing solar panels, and his blood turned to ice water. Military convoys didn't come this far out unless they were hunting something specific. He climbed down fast, his boots hitting sand with urgency. He tried to keep quiet. Inside the workshop, Lyra was already pressed against the far wall, her silver markings pulsing erratic with fear. She had heard the engines too. Her species had better hearing than humans, a gift that had probably kept her alive this long and now threatened to undo them both. Elias moved through the space with practiced efficiency, pulling a false panel from the storage wall he had built years ago for smuggling spare parts past tax inspectors. The compartment behind was narrow and dark, barely large enough for a person if they didn't mind being folded like a letter. Lyra looked at it, and then at him, her eyes wide with something beyond fear, something that looked like the memory of other small spaces, other times she had been hidden away. "I know," Elias said softly, because he did know. He could read it in every line of her body. "But it's this, or they take you." She understood. She always understood more than he expected. She climbed into the space without another word, pulling her knees to her chest, making herself smaller than physics should allow. Elias slid the panel back just as the first vehicle pulled up outside, its engine cutting with military precision. He wiped his hands on his work pants, forced his breathing to slow, and walked out to meet them with the casual annoyance of a man interrupted during valuable work time. 3 soldiers emerged, their armor marked with the insignia of the Earth Defense Corps, their weapons held loose but ready. The squad leader was a woman with a scar that ran from her temple to her jaw, the kind of scar that told stories no one wanted to hear twice. "Elias Carter?" she asked, though she already knew. They always knew. "That's me," he said, leaning against the doorframe like he had all the time in the world. "We're tracking a Kalon scout vessel that went down approximately 72 hours ago. Crash site is 300 meters northeast of your location." She watched him the way predators watch prey that might bolt. "You see anything unusual? Wreckage? Survivors?" Elias let a slow smile cross his face, the kind that belonged to a man who had learned to lie by, watching the desert teach everyone else. "I saw the smoke. Went out to look. Nothing but scrap metal and sand. If something survived that impact, it didn't stick around." The squad leader stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Mind if we take a look inside?" It wasn't a question. It never was. Elias shrugged and stepped aside, his heart a hammer against his ribs. "Be my guest." They moved through his workshop like a disease, touching everything, questioning everything. Their boots, leaving prints on floors he had swept clean that morning. The squad leader walked the perimeter with eyes that had been trained to find what people tried to hide, and Elias followed at a distance that felt casual but kept him close enough to redirect if she moved toward the false panel. One of the soldiers, younger than the others with a face still soft from a childhood that hadn't included war, picked up the wire sculpture Lyra had made. "What's this?" he asked, turning it in the light. Elias felt his throat tighten but kept his voice steady. "Art. I get bored." The squad leader paused at the workbench where Lyra had slept, her fingers trailing across the surface. Elias had scrubbed it twice, but he wondered now if some trace remained, some molecule of alien biology that their scanners could detect. She lifted her wrist and activated a device that bathed the room in blue light, sweeping slowly across walls and floor and the space where the false panel waited like a held breath. The scanner beeped twice, registering the usual signatures of human habitation, oil and metal, and the organic residue of a man who lived alone. Then it went silent. She frowned and swept again, more slowly this time, the blue light crawling across the storage wall like fingers searching for a pulse. Elias made himself breathe, made himself look bored rather than terrified. Behind the panel, Lyra would be folded in darkness, her lungs working to stay quiet, her silver markings hopefully dim enough to avoid detection. And through the cracks, the squad leader stared at the wall for what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds. Then she lowered the scanner and turned to face him. "You live out here alone?" she asked. 7 years now, Elias said. "Good work if you like silence." She studied him with eyes that had seen too many lies to trust any truth. "The thing about Kalon scouts," she said slowly, "is that they're trained to survive, trained to hide, and they're very good at finding people who might help them." Elias met her gaze without blinking, a trick he had learned from playing poker with men who killed for less than the price of a decent meal. "If I see a blue-skinned alien, you'll be my first call," he said. The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Then the young soldier coughed, breaking the tension, and the squad leader's jaw tightened with frustration. She knew something was wrong. She could feel it, the way animals feel storms coming, but knowing and proving were different countries, and she had no visa for the latter. "We'll be back," she said finally, turning toward the door. "Count on it." They left the way they came, their vehicles disappearing into dust and distance. Elias waited until the sound of engines faded completely before he opened the panel, and Lyra spilled out, gasping. Lyra sat on the floor with her back against the wall, gulping air like a drowning woman who had just broken the surface. Her silver markings flickered erratic and wild, and Elias realized she was crying without sound, tears tracking down blue skin in lines that caught the afternoon light. He brought her water, and she drank it in shaking hands, spilling half across her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw and fractured. "They will come back," she said. "They always come back." Elias nodded because lying to her now would be its own kind of cruelty. "Why are they so desperate to find you?" he asked. "What makes one scout worth this much trouble?" She looked at him for a long moment, weighing the cost of truth against the debt she owed. Then she reached up and touched the base of her skull, where her hairline met skin, and her fingers found something small and geometric embedded there. When she pressed it, a hologram bloomed in the air between them, blue light coalescing into data streams and star charts and something else, something that made Elias's breath catch. Coordinates, thousands of them. Fleet positions, supply routes, defensive weak points spanning 7 solar systems. Military intelligence so comprehensive it could end the war or prolong it for another generation depending on whose hands it fell into. "I was a data courier," Lyra said quietly. "They thought I was loyal. They thought fear made me theirs." The hologram rotated slowly, beautiful and terrible, a map of devastation waiting to be born. Elias stared at it, understanding now why the patrol had come, why they would keep coming, why mercy had made him the keeper of something that could kill millions. "Why did you run?" he asked. Lyra's laugh was bitter smoke. "I saw what they planned to do with it. Saw the colonies they would burn, the ships they would ambush, the children who would die so that generals could draw new lines on maps that only they could read. I thought if I ran far enough, if I hid deep enough, maybe the data would die with me." She closed her fist, and the hologram vanished, leaving only shadows. "But I crashed instead, and now you know." Elias stood and walked to the window, watching the desert stretch toward horizons that promised nothing but more desert. He could turn her in. Should turn her in. The war effort demanded it. Earth's survival might depend on it. But when he looked back at Lyra, at this girl who had chosen treason over participating in slaughter, who had carved beauty from wire scraps in the hours between terror, he could not find the part of himself willing to trade her life for strategy. "We need to destroy," he said finally. "Whatever you're carrying, we need to make sure no one ever gets it." Lyra's eyes widened, then filled with something that looked dangerously close to hope. "You would help me do that?" she asked, "even knowing what it might cost your people?" Elias turned back to the window, to the twin suns bleeding across the sky. "My people," he said quietly, "will have to win their war without betraying what makes us worth saving." The soldiers returned at dawn, more of them this time, their vehicles forming a perimeter that said no one was leaving without permission. Elias was already awake, had been awake most of the night working with Lyra to corrupt the data embedded in her neural port. The process was delicate and dangerous, like performing surgery with a hammer, but they had managed to scramble roughly 40% of the coordinates before exhaustion forced them to stop. Now the remaining 60% sat like a loaded gun behind Lyra's eyes, and the squad leader was knocking on his door with the kind of patience that had already run out. Elias opened it to find her flanked by 6 soldiers, all armed, all watching him like he was a puzzle that needed solving with bullets. "Elias Carter," she said, and this time his name sounded like an accusation. "You're under arrest for suspected conspiracy to harbor enemy combatants." They moved fast, professional, 2 soldiers securing his arms while a third read him rights. He stopped listening to halfway through. The squad leader walked past him into the workshop, her scanner already active, sweeping with the thoroughness of someone who had waited all night to be proven right. Elias didn't struggle. Struggling would make them search harder, would make them angry, would make them tear apart walls until they found what he had hidden. Instead, he went limp and cooperative, a man who had nothing to hide and even less to lose. They zip-tied his wrists and pushed him to his knees on the concrete floor. The squad leader found the false panel within 10 minutes. She had brought better equipment this time, scanners that read heat signatures and neural activity, technology that made lying obsolete. The panel came away with a metallic shriek, and Elias's heart dropped through the floor into some pit he couldn't name. But the compartment was empty. Lyra was gone. The squad leader spun on him, fury and confusion warring across her scarred face. "Where is she?" she demanded. Elias looked up at her with genuine surprise that wasn't entirely manufactured. "Where is who?" he asked. She hit him, not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to split his lip and send the taste of copper flooding his mouth. "The Kalon Scout. We know she's here. Our satellites tracked her distress beacon to this location before it went dark." Elias spat blood onto the floor and smiled through broken lips. "Your satellites are wrong," he said. She hit him again, and this time something in his cheekbone cracked. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Not quite mutiny, but not quite support either. There were rules about interrogating civilians, even in wartime, even in the desert where no one was watching. The squad leader raised her fist for a third strike, and that's when the explosion hit. The western wall of the workshop blew inward with a sound like the sky tearing, metal and concrete shredding into shrapnel that screamed through the air. Soldiers dove for cover, shouting coordinates and warnings, and through the smoke and chaos, Elias saw a figure silhouetted against the morning light. Lyra stood there, her silver markings blazing like lightning, her good hand holding a weapon she had jury-rigged from workshop parts. Her voice cut through the confusion like a blade. "Let him go." The standoff lasted 3 seconds, that felt like 3 lifetimes. Lyra stood in the ruined wall, her makeshift weapon humming with unstable energy that could vaporize everyone in the room or simply explode in her hands, the odds roughly equal. The soldiers trained their rifles on her, red targeting dots painting her chest like a constellation of endings. The squad leader was on her feet, blood trickling from a cut on her temple where shrapnel had kissed her. Her hand moved toward her sidearm, but stopped when Lyra's finger tightened on the trigger mechanism. "1 more inch, and we all become vapor," Lyra said, her English better now, sharpened by desperation into something almost fluent. "Let him go or test me." The young soldier who had admired the wire sculpture spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. "Ma'am, that weapon is breaching critical mass. If it discharges in this confined space, the thermal bloom alone will kill us all." The squad leader's jaw worked, pride and pragmatism fighting a war behind her eyes. She looked at Elias, still on his knees with blood dripping from his split face. Then back at Lyra, who stood like a broken angel, backlit by twin suns. The calculation was visible in her expression. 1 mechanic and 1 scout weren't worth 6 soldiers, and the intel they carried. Not in the cold mathematics of war. "Stand down," she said finally, and the rifles lowered by centimeters. Not enough to feel like surrender, but enough to breathe. "Cut him loose." A soldier approached Elias carefully, knife out, and sliced through the zip ties. Elias stood slowly, his ribs screaming where they had kicked him, and moved toward Lyra without looking back. She kept the weapon trained on the soldiers, kept her body between them and Elias as he passed into the sunlight behind her. They backed away together, step by careful step, neither turning their backs until they reached the old speeder Elias kept for supply runs. He climbed into the driver's seat, and Lyra slid in beside him, the weapon still live, still humming its song of potential destruction. The engine caught on the third try, and then they were moving, accelerating across sand that streamed behind them like smoke. The squad leader stood in the ruins of his workshop and watched them disappear into the desert's vastness. One of her soldiers asked if they should pursue, but she shook her head slowly. "Let them run," she said. "Tag them and let them run." What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, and was that, watching the mechanic risk everything for an enemy combatant had done something to the certainty she carried like armor. She touched her temple, where blood still flowed, and found herself wondering when mercy had become the thing they hunted instead of the thing they protected. Behind her, the young soldier was already on the comm, reporting the escape, reporting the coordinates, reporting everything except the moment when he had seen two people choose each other over survival and felt something in his own chest crack open. News of the incident spread like fire across military channels, and then beyond, into the networks where civilians whispered about the mechanic and the alien who had refused the script the war had written for them. They drove for 6 hours before the speeder's engine finally gave out, gasping its last breath in a canyon where red rock rose like cathedral walls and shadow pooled thick as water. Elias climbed out on legs that barely held him, his face swollen and dark with bruising, and collapsed against stone that still held the day's heat. Lyra set the weapon down carefully, its energy finally depleted, and knelt beside him with hands that had learned gentleness from watching his. She had medical supplies salvaged from the workshop before she blew the wall, and she worked now with the same deliberate care he had shown her that first night. Cleaning wounds, binding ribs, speaking softly in her own language, words that sounded like apologies or prayers or both. When she finished, they sat in silence as the twin suns set and the desert transformed into something silver and strange under 3 moons. Elias broke the quiet first, his voice rough with pain and exhaustion. "Why did you come back?" he asked. "You could have run, could have taken the speeder and been gone before they even knew you'd left the compartment." Lyra looked at her hands, at the silver lines that now pulsed slow and steady, no longer panicked. "You lifted me when I couldn't fight," she said. "You gave me shelter when protocol demanded you give me chains. I could not leave you to face consequences that belonged to both of us." She met his eyes, and in hers he saw something that had been absent before, not just gratitude or trust, but the kind of resolve that moves mountains or tears them down. "The data," she continued, touching the port at the base of her skull. "We corrupted 40%. The rest is still intact, still valuable, still enough to make me worth hunting until the stars burn out." She paused, weighing words like weapons. "There is a way to destroy it completely, to burn it out of my neural pathways so thoroughly that not even fragments remain." Elias sat up straighter despite his ribs protesting. "How?" he asked. Lyra's expression went carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that hides things too heavy to show. "The port connects directly to my central nervous system. A controlled overload would fry every trace of the data, corrupt it beyond any recovery. But the surge would also damage my cognitive functions. Memory loss, motor control issues, perhaps permanent, perhaps just severe enough to make me someone other than who I am now." The weight of it settled between them like a stone. Elias stared at her, at this girl who had already given up her people, her mission, her future, and was now offering to give up pieces of herself to ensure no one could weaponize what she carried. "There has to be another way," he said, but they both knew he was lying. Lyra smiled, sad and certain. "You taught me that sometimes mercy costs everything," she said. "Let me choose what I'm willing to pay." In the distance, engines growled across sand. Search, parties spreading like a net. Time was a luxury they no longer owned. Elias looked at Lyra, really looked at her, and saw courage that made his own seem small. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it together. Whatever you become after, you won't face it alone." The procedure took 17 minutes and felt like 17 years. Elias used the last of the speeder's battery to generate the surge, routing it through improvised circuits he built from salvage and desperation. Lyra lay against the canyon wall with her eyes closed, her hand gripping his so tightly he thought his bones might break. When he triggered the overload, her whole body went rigid, her silver markings blazing bright enough to paint shadows on stone, and then she screamed. Not in words, in something older than language, a sound that tore through the canyon like grief-given voice. The surge lasted 8 seconds. When it ended, smoke rose from the neural port in thin wisps, and Lyra went limp. Elias caught her before she fell, cradling her against his chest, his hand checking for a pulse he found after 3 heartbeats of terror. She was alive, breathing, but when her eyes opened, they moved slowly, searching the world like a stranger trying to remember a place she had visited long ago. "Lyra," he said softly. She turned her head toward his voice, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition, relief. "Elias," she whispered, and the fact that she remembered his name felt like a miracle he didn't deserve. But when she tried to stand, her legs betrayed her, and when she tried to speak again, the words came slow and tangled, synapses misfiring like stars collapsing in on themselves. They stayed in the canyon for 3 days while Lyra's mind learned itself again. Some things returned quickly. Her name, his name, the memory of the workshop and the crash. Other things remained broken, scattered like glass she couldn't quite piece together. She forgot how to tie knots and had to relearn. Forgot the word for water and had to point until the language found her again. But she laughed when she finally remembered, a sound so pure it made Elias's chest ache. On the 4th day they heard it, not engines, not soldiers, but voices, dozens of them, echoing through the canyon like a song passed between strangers who had learned the same melody. They climbed to the ridge and saw them, civilians, mostly, mechanics and farmers and dockworkers and teachers, humans and a handful of Kalons who had defected, all of them walking toward coordinates that had spread through underground networks like roots seeking water. They carried supplies, medical equipment, food, tools, no weapons. When they saw Elias and Lyra standing on the ridge, they stopped. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then others joined, until the canyon rang with applause that sounded like hope, refusing to stay quiet. The squad leader had been right. News of the mechanic and the alien had spread, but what had spread wasn't fear or anger. It was the dangerous idea that mercy could be chosen. That 2 people from opposite sides of a war could look at each other and decide that the other's life mattered more than victory. A woman stepped forward, her arm in a sling, her face lined with the kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving rather than living. "We heard what you did," she said. "We heard what you gave up." She gestured to the crowd behind her. "We're done fighting for people who punish kindness. If you'll have us, we'd like to help build something different." Elias looked at Lyra, at her silver markings glowing soft in the afternoon light, at the courage that had cost her so much and given the galaxy something it had forgotten how to imagine. She nodded once, certain despite everything. They descended together into the crowd, and the canyon that had witnessed their sacrifice became the birthplace of something the war could not kill. Not a rebellion built on rage, but a movement built on the radical belief that every life, regardless of the skin that held it, deserved to be lifted when it fell. In a universe that had learned to measure worth in firepower and territory, 2 broken people had reminded it of a simpler math. That mercy, freely given, multiplies in ways weapons never could, and sometimes, in the space between cruelty and kindness, an entire galaxy finds room to heal.